The daylight's getting a little shorter, but they remember what you do in November. Notre Dame has a lot in front of it this November, seeking a return trip to the college football playoffs. This is Irish Illustrated's Instant Analysis, brought to you by the RV Manufactured Housing Hall of Fame in Northern Indiana Event Center in Elkhart, Indiana. I am John Brice. To my right, Drew Mentock. To my left, Tim O'Malley. Visited with a handful of Notre Dame players today, as well as ever-refreshing linebackers coach Max Bullough. We will get there because it's worth it, but we will start with CJ Carr, the quarterback. Drew, you and I both got some time with CJ Carr today. What stood out to you about where CJ Carr is mentally and where he feels like he is coming out of a much-needed open date?
Yeah, I wanted to ask him about how, you had a bye early in the year, but it was after week one. He mentioned it came after a loss. That was way different. He stayed on campus. He just went through his normal routine as best he could. This week, he went home. He went to his brother's high school football game. He's talked about how nice it was to not have to perform, to have to deal with that pressure for the first time in a while. So he didn't necessarily say, I really needed this, but you could tell it was nice to kind of have that respite, given everything he's kind of went through. And then we kind of went into some of the specific maybe issues. I asked him if his kind of errant throws early in the USC game, if that had anything to do with weather. He said flat out no, that had nothing to do with weather, and I threw the ball later in the game. And then we also got a little too about USC kind of playing zone with two high safeties and the impact that had on him, and just him needing to really understand, okay, we're just going to hand it off. And he said, I was like, is it easy for you when you have such a good deep ball to let that go? And he's like, well, no, because I forced one and it turned into an interception. So clearly I need to get better at that. But you could tell USC did some things and he kind of needed that break. So we'll see how he kind of gets back to it against Boston College this weekend.
Yeah, CJ Carr continues to come into his own as a very natural leader. I appreciated the ownership that he took when you asked him the weather-related question for USC, and he said, no, I thought it was raining harder in the game, later in the game, and we threw the ball just fine. One other note about getting to go home to Saline, Michigan. I joked with him. He said he had gotten to go watch his brother's high school football game, and his brother's going to get his chance to play college football. And I said, well, you're Notre Dame's starting quarterback. Did you have to sign some autographs when you go back? And he goes, yeah, actually I did, but that community's been great to me. They support me so much. I relish the opportunity to be back there. Another offensive person we got to spend some time with today, Tim O'Malley, would be new starting center Joe Auding, who I don't think he ever stopped smiling. It was for a guy who plays with that kind of nasty disposition, boy, he's got a pleasant smile.
It's a shame Max Bullough was there because Joe Auding would have won the day if he could have. But one more thing about CJ Carr, I think he didn't have to sign too many autographs because he's already signed every autograph in Saline, Michigan. So Joe Auding, he talks about how everybody supports him, and it was a wonderful story about how he talks to his parents and how his dad gives him a pep talk before every game. This pep talk wasn't that much different for USC because he wanted to keep it a little bit even keel. But just asking Joe Auding what the moment's like when you get your first start, and Jeremiah Love 2 snaps later is running through the hole you provided, and then there's a touchdown after that. He admitted, that was a surreal feeling. It's USC. The nerves are there. He joked that, I saw him running past me, and I was like, you couldn't catch him, so that's a good thing for you, right, Joe? And he was just, I think, the happiest version of himself, and he also admitted it's a journey just because you get named the starter. He was named the starter because Ashton Craig got hurt. He has to go out and prove himself in practice, and then he went out and proved himself in the game. And you know what? We didn't say this to Joe Auding, but it's going to be true. Just like CJ Carr's growth was not going to be like that, Joe Auding's isn't either. But he performed in the biggest game of his life to date.
And of note, CJ Carr telling me about Joe Otting. I said, what did you learn? And or what did you have validated that you already knew? And he said, you know what? It took Joe about a day and a half to establish himself as the starter, and then he's been that dude ever since then. So again, I think that lends some insight into the mentality of a number of these players. I liked hearing Joe Otting talk about how much his brothers on the offensive line, he said, my boys, I'm out there with my boys. Of course, you're ready to go play ball. But he said they got him ready for it all week long just by being themselves and telling him to be himself.
Yeah, I think it matters too that he has been preparing for this for 3 years. He's brought in. He's playing center. Sometimes there is that advantage that guys like Sullivan Absher, Gerby Lambert don't have. Charles Jagusa. Joe Auding was brought in to play center. He's been working at center. He got his chance. It's the ultimate delayed gratification that Marcus Freeman always talks about. I mean, other than the 1990 shoulder pads he was sporting out there today, I think he is going to continue to grow in this offense, and they have confidence in him because the confidence in him was from snippets they had seen. Now they have confidence because he has performed at the highest level he possibly could against in the most important game.
He has a resume now that every opponent can see, whereas his resume before was simply the practice field. And also Joe Auding saying, it's just getting out there and doing what you're born to do. And I said, well, when did you know you were born to be an offensive lineman? He said, well, my dad played offensive lineman in Kansas, and he's 6'5", 3, and then he stopped at 3 and just said, my dad's a big dude. So there you go, Joe Otting, born to be an offensive lineman. Drew, anything else from CJ Carr that you want to shed some insight on before we talk about some of the other individuals we visited with today?
Yeah, I mean, somebody did it. So about 2 months ago, Gino Guidugli brought up his relationship with Tom Brady as his dad played with him at Michigan. His grandfather obviously coached him. That is not something CJ Carr was willing to get into with us. He actually passed on that question, which is not something he typically does. So kind of makes you wonder if that's something that Tom Brady said you need to not share or something on down. But it was kind of interesting that he also got asked about Joe Montana earlier on, who was at the USC game. So you kind of had maybe two of the all-time greatest quarterbacks kind of in his aura or vicinity, although he didn't get to meet Joe Montana 2 weeks ago. He kind of has that connection, which is interesting, even if he's not willing to get into it too much.
Now, we also spent some time with Tae Johnson and Jason Onye. I don't know if you got to make it over to either of those individuals. I've already lost my train of thought since we started this video. It's getting cold. I'm in shorts. Yeah. But did you get a chance to visit with those individuals, and kind of what stood out to you from them?
Yeah, I talked to Tae Johnson. I thought it was really interesting. I mean, he kind of carries himself pretty confidently now. I thought that stood out. And he talked a lot about how much his preparation has really improved. When he came in, even at the start of the year, he didn't really understand how much needed to go into that. He watches film at least 45 minutes every night, kind of putting in that extra work. And he's like, I could still do more. But then, and I think Pete Sampson was asking about this, like he had some of those plays against USC where he kind of ran down the guy on the outside and made the tackle, and kind of came out of nowhere. And he's like, that is coming from watching film. And then I got into a little more like, are you thinking when you do that? He's like, no, like the preparation pays off, and it just feels like this is what I'm supposed to do. And he's kind of reacting. And it's really interesting to see such a young player who we thought would take more time to develop. Clearly, he's been putting in the work that we can't see, watching a lot of film and doing that. And that's really what's taken off. He has the athleticism. He has a lot of those natural abilities, but he's working a lot on the mental aspect, and that's really allowing that aspect of his game to take off.
Skill, talent, and now experience are taking over for Tae Johnson. It's been a long journey for Jason Onye to take over a consistent starting role. And he didn't talk a great deal about his personal journey today, Tim O'Malley, but he did visit with us and talk about his development as a player and where he is right now for that Notre Dame defensive line.
It's coming off I think as Tim Priester wrote, it's his best game, but it's his best, most important game. Jason Onye's had a smattering of good games along the way, especially a couple of years ago. This is a crucial development, especially with Gabriel Rubio out. I thought, today might be the time that Jason Onye would kind of discuss his long journey back. I guess that time will come at some point. As we talked about, he's going to have to discuss that when he auditions for the NFL, but that will be behind closed doors, and that's up to him when he wants to share that. But very interesting, Drew, that you said that about Tae Johnson. I feel like us as writers and reporters, analysts, media don't understand that just because you're practicing, you're talented, you can't just go out there for the first time and play as fast and as clear as you want. I'm not using clarity equals velocity. Max Bullough mentioned that Madden Framo is one of those guys that has to go on the practice field and rep it a couple times. He goes, because he's a freshman, and that's what freshmen have to do. Kingston Viliamu-Asa, Tim Priester asked him about Kingston Viliamu-Asa. What's different now? He's like, well, last year he knew absolutely everything, but now he knows absolutely everything and can tell other people what to do. It is all about time. It's all about reps. It's all about getting out there. Even Drake Bowen, he was asked by Tyler James, that pass against Texas A&M, what did he learn from that? He's like, he thought he knew it. We thought he knew it. He didn't know it as well as he thought he did. And since then, he has covered two guys down the rail much better. Sometimes you have to experience failure. No one wants to hear it because it can knock you out of a playoff game, but that's not how real life works. You experience failure. If it knocks you out of the playoff game, it does. It's not always someone's fault in that situation.
Yeah, and for Drake Bowen specifically, he said, he's got to relax in that moment and trust what he's been coached to do.
When the ball's in the air.
He's relaxed and done that much better on KVA. I found it very interesting. He said he's a guy that plays with every fiber of his body. That's how I envision him. And he said, so last year he was able to do that, but mentally it took so much out of him. This year, the capacity is there for more from KVA, and it's showing on the field. And you had a great question about how much does chemistry between the linebackers matter with how you pair them. And he said 100%. It matters how these guys feed off of one another, flow off of one another, and complement each other as to how we handle our substitution packages. I asked him specifically, what do Bloody Tuesdays mean for you and your group? And he said, it means we better be out there eliminating something from the opponent's playbook, doing something that disrupts them, becoming a force, taking things away. And he said, quote, we expect to be the biggest, baddest, most physical unit on the field anytime, anywhere that we play. Drew, any additional items for you that stood out from Max Bullough today?
Yeah, I think going back to Drake Bowen and just how much his coverage has improved since that Texas A&M game too. I mean, he had a key fourth down stop against USC, a pass breakup. We referenced running with Hollywood Smothers against NC State on that deep ball. He really has improved. So you've seen it on the field, and then you've seen, I think we make a lot about the pass defense's improvements over the last month and a half or so. And it's not just the secondary, but you've seen it with the linebackers. Drake Bowen, as I just mentioned, Kingston Viliamasa, that's an area he thrives in. Getting Madden Framo on the field has helped a bunch there, because that is an area that he's really kind of taken to naturally. I know in practices earlier, like they said, he was getting 3 interceptions in certain practices. So getting that type of player on the field too has made a big difference for them. And then you can kind of let Jalen Sneed play in a role that's a little more specific to his skill set too.
And speaking of Jalen Sneed, you asked about him, T.O., and he said, yes, in a game of consequence, this is his most complete performance.
It was his most physical performance, and he was also able to unleash the Jalen Sneed speed. When you see him out in the flat, and Maiyava can run and throw, it's Jalen Sneed. He's not going anywhere. You expect that from Sneed, but when he's coming through, fighting off a double team on third down, getting a run stuff, Bullough mentioned, of course, with his photographic film memory that number 12 helped him out, and Jordan Botello. You had not seen a lot of Jalen Sneed fighting off double teams, being physical at the point of attack. If that's the Jalen Sneed they get, that's going to be an interesting December and January development. Now, I jumped the gun, of course, and I was able to switch topics, but his other best game ever was Navy. That's coming up in 2 weeks, and I want to see if he continues to play with that ferocity he has shown, because obviously this will be a physical game, but it's not the same situation as maybe Navy and Pitt coming up. Sneed is hugely important because they want to rotate all those guys. Tim Priester asked about, is it the situation where you kind of notice you don't want to take Kingston off the field because he can do so many good things? And he said, he's a guy that plays, when you said with every fiber, every muscle in his body, he probably can't play every play. He's a guy that actually needs 20 snaps off. Works out well because a lot of guys need 20 snaps that are play around him.
Yeah, Max Bullough specifically saying, maybe we don't want to play King 80 snaps, but we get 60 at maximum effort and contribution from him. Also, he called that Jalen Sneed play on 3rd and 5 the play of the game. He said he knocked the guy back, he made the play, and then he got some help from 12. Of course, as you noted, 12 being Botello. Finally, he was asked about how much the linebackers relish the opportunity to impact pass rush, and he said, well, especially on third downs, a lot of times there's 3 of us out there. When there's 3 of us out there, we better be doing something to impact pass rush and to impact the opposition. And then lastly, he was asked what happened at the end of the USC game when he had some words with somebody from the USC sideline who had meandered into the vicinity of Notre Dame while he was singing its alma mater, and he just said, yeah, we were singing our alma mater. I didn't think it was a real good idea for that. I got to be there, and I let him know. So there you go. We've let you know as much as we can until we come to you with more written content on Irish Illustrated, as well as Thursday's Irish Illustrated Insider podcast. Tim O'Malley and Drew Mentock both will be in Boston in 5 days, bringing you coverage from there, as well as Tim Priester and myself. So for the Irish Illustrated crew, this has been Irish Illustrated Instant Analysis, brought to you by the RV Manufacturers Hall of Fame and Northern Indiana Events Center in lovely Elkhart, Indiana.